Option 2, rent with option to buy. This strategy requires finding a tenant who would like to purchase the property at some point in the future. The seller and the buyer agree to a purchase price and a time frame, at the end of which the buyer will get a mortgage and buy the property from the seller. During this time, the buyer will make monthly rent payments to the seller. A non-refundable down payment is paid to the seller as a condition of the purchase. The title stays with the seller until at the end of the time frame when the buyer gets a mortgage and buys the property from the seller. This increases the buyer pool for the seller because now he or she is able to add prospective buyers who have good incomes but cannot qualify for a mortgage, but working through those issues. And at the end of the time frame, if the buyer cannot buy the property or cannot get a mortgage for the property, then the seller can extend the time frame for further, or just cancel the agreement and keep the down payment. Now, the pros of this strategy is, again, it increases the buyer pool for the seller. And number 2 is the seller may ask for a higher purchase price because he or she is extending the purchase time. Number 3, since the buyer is a tenant who's going to own this property during the rent period, they will presumably take better care of the property. And at the end of the scheduled time, if the buyer is unable to buy the property, then the seller keeps the down payment, thus increasing his cash flow. The cons of this strategy is that this is a purchase agreement, so anything that is promised in writing and in verbal has to be really vetted out and has to be studied, and it has to be done by a lawyer. And number 2 is the seller is still the landlord during the time period. If he or she is tired of being a landlord, then it really doesn't solve their problem. Number 4, the seller has to do a thorough due diligence to find a tenant who will qualify for a mortgage. Otherwise, they're just going through the motion of being a landlord-tenant relationship. And finally, the additional work may be necessary on the seller's part to engage a credit repair bureau to help the buyer qualify for a mortgage.